This episode's sponsored by Vorbos. Check them out in the description below. I wanted to touch on the fact that you guys are best friends, because I think that's a really important point for a lot of people, because obviously there's the age-old thing of, don't mix business and friends and don't work with friends. I've always found it to be a great thing. I find it to be really conducive. I spoke to an entrepreneur the other day who said, I believe in starting things with friends and working with friends, but I don't believe in hiring friends, because then there's a power dynamic there that I'm not really comfortable with. But then I've met people who have done the opposite. So talk me through that. What was it like? Did you guys think about that ahead of time, about what it was going to be like? Did you have to sit down and say, look, who's doing what, who's this, who's that? I think that's quite an uncomfortable thing for a lot of people.
I think we've always had a very, very clear understanding of where we want to go, and we realize that working together is going to mean that we're going to get there. So I think we've been clear about that from the start. At the beginning, I think it did help that I'd started the business and I was able to impart the knowledge. So I was in a way to begin with senior, but then very quickly I saw Dan was fully invested in it and wanted to share it with him. So I think that really aided things, and we now have regular conversations in terms of our approach to it, and where we want to get to, and how we're feeling about things. So we're very open in that regard, and yeah, we've got the same friendship group, we live together, so yeah, it hasn't been a negative at all, and it helps knowing someone really, really well, I think.
Yeah, and it's that level of trust. It's where you know someone so well, you know every single thing about them, you know what they're good at, what they're not so good at. And for us, it's worked incredibly well, because we knew going in, and this is sort of bringing it back to what I said initially, we were going to make it work. And I knew how hard Wanted worked through school, and I knew how hard we needed to work together to make it work. And a lot of the time, if you go in with a friend, sometimes that friend doesn't work as hard, or there's one person who's not doing or pulling their weight. That never happened with us, and so we always pulled our weight. We always went into things together, and I think it's a bit of a weird situation to be living with and with someone. But for us, it really worked, because the only time we had to ourselves where we could say, right, let's work on the business rather than in the business, was on car journeys. And so it was on the commute, and we used to drive. It was about an hour and 15 from Bristol into our warehouse in Mytton, and they were some of the most productive hours. And so we literally lived, breathed, slept, eat. And so it's just worked incredibly well. I think we complement each other well in terms of what we're good at, and what we're not so good at. And I think you have to get lucky with that, because I do know people that
you do. Yeah, you do. You need to know the other person very well, right? I think me and Ollie starting this podcast, it's a good match of skills, and you need to know that before you start, to be honest with you. Yeah, I'd like to know, what is it that's, in terms of the division sort of between the two of you, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, and vice versa? Like, where do you complement each other? Because I always find that interesting.
So I think I look at things from a more financial perspective. It's purely based on how I've been thinking from a very young age, because I always wanted to make sure we were making the most with our money, and we were reinvesting it in the right way. So yeah, on the financial side and the product marketing side, I do a little bit more, and people.
Yeah, so I think this is where it complements quite well. We do a lot of the same things on different channels. So for example, I might manage Amazon, while Monty might manage Wayfair, but there are separate things that we do outside of that. So obviously with the people side, I'm probably stronger in terms of like teams and people and pulling people together, making sure people are on task, that sort of thing. But in terms of the division of work, we do a lot of things, and I think it really helped in the early stages, because we could do everything. We weren't relying on one another to say, oh, I can't do this, can you do that? Or I can't. Yeah, it's an interesting one, because people always ask that, but we don't, like a lot of founders, we don't have separate roles where I'm only responsible for product, for example, and Monty's only responsible for financials. We do a lot of the same things.
I think we have stronger areas, and Dan deals with certain areas, like all the legal things, looking through legal documentation and that sort of thing. But as Dan said, we do have a lot of skills that we are both very good at, because we essentially grew up together in business, so we both know the same things, or many of the same things, and I think where the division lies is where we prefer and where we enjoy and where we maybe worked a little bit harder over the years.
Obviously, as you said, you approached Johnny with it first, and you were school friends.
Yeah.
That's something we've touched on before. In our last episode, we had the founders of Furniture Box, and they were friends from school, and we asked them the same question. But what was it like for you approaching someone who was quite a good friend about a business idea? Because obviously that can go either way. And were you hesitant already, or how did that feel?
No. So Johnny and I were one of those friends that just talked about business all the time.
Right.
I've known him since I was 13, and it's like he was probably my only friend that I did that with, more or less. We just always had. He always had an idea. I always had an idea. We never actually did anything with our ideas, which is it's still fun to have those conversations, right?
That was kind of like what we used to do.
I was going to say, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Right, but then eventually, when you do have an idea and it gels and the timing's right, then who's then that person you naturally go to?
Yeah,
right.
Subscribe to the ground floor.
There you go. And so, look, when he was at Nottingham University, I was at Leeds, and we came close to doing one which would have been like, it was basically Lad Bible, but before Lad Bible. How do you get the university experience? Anyway, I can't be able to get into that, but it could have worked. I was actually, the reason we didn't pursue that is I was doing a different startup at university, which would have been more of like an Uber Eats thing. Turns out it's quite expensive to do that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it wasn't awkward coming to Johnny. And look, I knew it was a good idea. I absolutely knew it was going to work. It had to, because it was, as I've just explained, all the pieces were there.
Yeah.
It was just a case of building it and funding it, and he got very excited very quickly about it. And then we really got to work. He's a chartered accountant. So he had a very important skill set that I did not possess. I managing my own personal finances is challenging, let alone, managing a business, which can get complicated. But then the obvious piece that was missing was the CTO, and that sort of it kind of fell into our lap. But yeah, it wasn't difficult getting Johnny on board whatsoever.
Mm.
And importantly, I say this to people founding businesses all the time. It's like, especially if you're at that very early stage and somebody is offering you a skill set that you don't possess and it's vital to the success of the business, then it's much better just be equal.
Yeah.
So the three co-founders all had exactly equal equity. God forbid I said, well, it's my idea, so I think I should get like 4% more. Or like, well, I'm the tech guy, I'm the one building it, I think I should get 3% more. And then it's like, off the bat, it's unequal.
Yeah.
But like 3%. And some people do get like that about points. And it's the wrong time to do that. That's for like other people.
Yeah.
That's like after your
creates an awkward dynamic as well, doesn't it, from day one?
Yeah. And then what happens is, further down the line, if somebody has less skin in the game, it's like, well, I'm not working to make you rich.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, well, no, we're all equal. We're all contributing equally. And what also you'll find is that in a founding team, particularly if there's 3 co-founders, actually that's not true, it could be any number, including 2, is that depending on the business, the importance of the role fluctuates.
Yeah.
So when we were building the product, obviously the developer role was really important. Sales took a backseat because we didn't have anything to sell.
Yeah.
And then raising money was really important. That's where the CFO really comes in, arranging meetings with like every fucking investor in the world and making sure the pitch deck is on point. And, and so there'll be some times where it's like clearer who is adding the most quote unquote value, but it all comes out in the wash over time. And so that's why it's important to have the foresight to go, yeah, you might be adding the most value now, but believe me, these guys are going to carry you later.
Yeah. So you founded Absolute Collagen with your mum, which is obviously quite an original story because that doesn't happen very often. So why don't you take us sort of for a few minutes back to the very, very beginning? How did that even come about?
Yeah, of course. So I went off to uni to do food science. I actually applied to do psychology and then randomly changed last minute, which is kind of like a weird curveball in the story. My sister turned 17 so she could learn to drive. And my mum woke up one day and kind of sat at the end of the bed and was like, I haven't got any kids. Like, what do I do? Like, I have this life. Like, I can do anything with it. She hadn't got to be like the mum, the best friend. Like, she realized she could be kind of whoever she wanted to be. So she always had this affinity with art, fine art. She's like, I'm going to do an art degree. So she embarked on that. We both did a year of uni with nothing kind of no synergies really. Luckily, it wasn't the same uni because that wouldn't have. She
That
would
would've
have a
been interesting.
better social
Yeah.
life than me, I think.
Right.
Probably.
Wow.
Yeah,
character?
she was quite wild, but she was always that person that sort of walked in the room. She was like the entertainer, but that wasn't kind of like who she truly was, if that made sense. But in doing this art degree, she did one. She could kind of choose what she wanted to do. Like art students are wacky and eccentric. I think we can all
Very true.
agree on that one.
Very true.
But she did this project and she called it Dare to Go Bare. And she turned up at my bedroom door one day with a big tattoo here, a nose piercing, and I've got quite long, like curly hair. She did too. She chopped it all off and stripped the colour out. When you strip the colour out of something, it goes yellow, ginger, orange,
Okay.
and had this like wacky hair. And I was like, oh my God, you've lost it. Like, she bought a motorbike 2 years before, like a Ducati, like 900.
Your mum sounds like just an absolute legend.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
she's-
so
Yeah.
far. I mean, you touched on your relationship with your mum, but I think that's a really interesting thing to circle back to because I think a lot of people will have impressions about what it could be like working with family or working with friends. And that smile, I think, is quite telling. So do you think there is anything maybe that you would have done differently in terms of working with your mum? And what if someone was to ask you, I'm thinking of going into business with maybe a family member, what do you think?
If looking back, I would give my mum more of a break. I could be quite ruthless.
Right.
Yeah, but we are very direct and straight with each other, and that kind of scares people sometimes. So yeah, my boyfriend works at AC, so we've been together since before Absolute College. And
Yeah.
he was an accountant, and every evening I'd be like, numbers. I'm
Yeah.
dyslexic, mum's dyslexic. Don't give us
Okay.
anything to do
Yeah,
with.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, maths. And then so he came on board. My little sister does all our organic social media.
Okay.
I think, and it might sound really bad, my dad and my mum split up when I was 12. I think if my mum had a partner, it wouldn't have worked. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
In what
Like,
in what way?
like another man, like a man in the house. We were working from home. She was taking big risks. We were taking big risks as a family. I think if there was another person in that situation, that she could have.
They could have been like, are you sure this is a good idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Someone to
so.
dissuade her almost.
Yeah, and I think our relationship's awesome. Like, we have. My mum's like very creative and wacky. She always says like, "We are but three." This is like her thing, and it's like whichever one of us needs to step forward at the time, being me, my sister, or her, like we'll do, and we'll kind of like lead on that. But yeah, I think she was with my dad for 15 years. AC wouldn't be where it is if she didn't stop drinking, so she's not drunk for like 10 years now, or 2, like split up with my dad because she wouldn't have realized her own kind of confidence worth issues.
Yeah.
So it's all happened. That's the thing with business, isn't it? Like everyone's like, how did you do it? Like blah 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 blah. I'm like, right product, right time. Like there's a lot of luck involved. Like there is. Like you can work as hard as you want, but there's certain moments that can be like the pinnacle of the turning point of you doing something.
Yeah.
And I'm sure if we made a load of those decisions differently, we wouldn't have been in the same position.
Sure.
And a lot of that is down to luck, I guess.
And you started it with your sister, and you're
Yeah.
running it with your sister to this day.
Yeah.
Was she in the beauty industry before that?
So she, after her university, she went to work for my dad. So she actually didn't get the corporate experience. She got more like the family experience.
Right.
But yes, in the beauty industry. So I think we've both been such beauty lovers from a young age. And actually, fun fact with my dad as well. Like my dad studied engineering, electrical electronic engineering, same as mine. So I think that was also really comforting to know that he did that transition. So I can do that transition. So sometimes I laugh. I'm like, I just copycatted my father.
Yeah, because he did the exact same.
And he failed as
engineering
well.
to
So like literally
Yeah.
did the exact same thing. It's really freaky. But I think, yeah. So I think I was sometimes jealous for my sister to having that kind of experience of being mentored by my dad in a business sense. But at the same time, I think that's where we make a perfect duo today. She was mentored by my dad. I was mentored by some of the industry giants like LVMH and Estee Lauder. And together creating this company, we sort of have this duality of that kind of yin and yang of, okay, let's like use those both as an advantage.
We've had a fair few guests that have worked with their friends or with their family, and I like asking this every time that it does happen because I do think it's a different experience every time. But what would you say about that experience? Because obviously there's all the horror stories of working with friends or family. It can go really, really badly. I think it's better if you're partnered in a business like you are with your sister, as opposed to hiring your friends or family, which can probably be stickier. But sort of talk to me a little bit about how you feel about that, and maybe what you might say to people that are thinking of doing the same thing.
Yeah, so listen, it's not the easiest by any means. I mean, there is so many pros, and there are inevitably cons that could be associated with that. I think the pros, I like to start with the positive, is like you have potentially with friendships or siblings or partners, you have that kind of innate trust in each other. You have also history of years. Like I've got, my whole life of experience with my sister, so that definitely helps. So you want to know if you go into business bed with someone that you trust that person. I think it's very important. And number two, I think you have that open communication and potentially ways that you know a bit more about each other, that you can probably adapt and probably make better judgments when it comes to certain business moves as well, because you know that person very well inside out.
Do you sort of allocate different decisions based around your different areas of experience?
Absolutely. I think like that's something like I'm, she's not much of a, like I'm more decisive. So I'm the one who ends up taking on the role of like the CEO and one that kind of approves everything, even her budget. And then she's a lot more creative. So I'm the one who says, like, let her have a moment. If she wants to not come to the meetings or come to the office and then wants to work at 3 a.m., that's when her creative juices are flowing. Let that be. So I think because of her personality traits, I let that shine. But then going to the cons, I think like there are, you could probably get kind of short-tempered, or like you can get heated quite quickly because of that kind of that lack of, like, I guess, barriers of just like, I just want to tell you what it is. That's often when you fight with your siblings. So you have to make sure you have certain healthy barriers. You don't also spend too much time together because, like, say at Christmas, you don't even talk about business, like certain things like that. You have to set those moments apart. And I think also just make sure you don't, like, you really understand, like, if something does go wrong with the business, that shouldn't hopefully affect your relationship as a sibling or as your loved one. And one way I really would recommend people when they're thinking about going into business with someone they know already is setting those ground rules from the beginning and not being shy to address that before you start. So I had this really uncomfortable conversation with my sister with a legal person attending, where we talked about all the permutations of like what could go wrong, what could happen, like if she has a partner, if I have a partner, if that person, coerces or changes our mind and wants you to like do something, or if one of us wants to sell the business earlier than the other, like all this stuff. We had to like literally brainstorm all of those potential outcomes and make safety nets for the business, not for our own egos, but for what's healthiest for that. Because at the end of the day, very quickly, like now with Fable and Maine, it's no longer me and my sister's business. It's so many stakeholders' business. It's my team that's growing every day. It's my customers. It's my retailers, and I have to protect all of them.
I want to touch on your relationship a little bit, because we've had quite a few guests that have come on who are friends or even family members that work together. And I like asking this question every single time because the answer has always been different. But it's like, in terms of working with friends and family, there is a stigma about it. What if it goes wrong, ruins the relationship as well as the business? What are your thoughts on working with friends and family, and how has that been for the two of you?
Maybe I think for us it's a little bit different because we first met as colleagues. So we weren't friends first, but rather I joined Barclays, and then our friendship literally started on the first day, where after the morning meeting at like 7 a.m., she rocks up as we walk out of the meeting. She's like, shall we grab lunch together? And I was like, great. In the sea of male traders and just male presence on the trading floor, I was like, that's really nice. Let's do that. And then we just kind of became like work friends, and then the business trip happened. We actually became like friends, but we always had a very strong working culture between us, because as sales and trading, you are always negotiating prices. You sometimes argue because you have interests that might be like might have to be consolidated, and that made us really good communicators. However, we still like had such a long way to go, because when we actually quit and worked on Why Hangry full time, can you imagine? I don't know how much time you guys spent together, but I was seeing her more than my partner, or speaking to her more than like anyone else. And that relationship, especially if you have the friends element, can get a bit overwhelming. So then since we started, I think, although we were already good at communicating, we've become like so much better as well. Where now, I think she mentioned it earlier, we're like the same person. Like we often can like not read each other's minds. That's like so cheesy.
But yeah, literally.
Kind of
we
know
just
what
grab.
the
The way we
think.
speak, it'll just be like filling in in gaps, knowing what the person. And what I'll say is like, I actually thought I had no awareness of communication as a topic at the beginning when we started our founder journey. And coming from finance means you're set up for like, we were like, right, every day. It's like, no. And it's like really interesting the way you act. And we both understood it. So it was perfect. But I think over time, you're like, wow, we need to adapt because actually in startup, everything isn't instant P&L, which means if you're instantly trying to resolve things or resolve like a topic, you're not resolving it, you're building long term. So I think we have actually come through a lot of like realizing how we speak. Things like never write anything negative over a Slack message because you might just mean it very like, no, I disagree, and you just leave it in like a little bit of like a negative, let's say, aura of the message without overthinking because you're just multitasking. The other person picks it up and goes, like...
They're pissed at me.
And then actually we have such a big impact on each other. So we also have had some coaching, but together, like we both in the same session, founder coaching. And I think seeing some of the highs and lows, and everyone talks about it, but there are a lot of emotional highs and lows. And the low emotional lows really are like, you're just trying to figure out answers where no one's given you an answer. So obviously there are a lot of lows because you're like, dude, I have no clue what's going on. And I think having been through those together, you start to drop your ego. And I think now, like, Heinen is the one person I'll go to with war, and I'll just know she has my back. And I was thinking about that on the tube today. I was like, Jesus Christ, it's so true. Like, you are that person, and I, like, 100% trust you. And I think once you move your trust, and that trust means, like, I trust her calibers, like, we both equally deserve to be co-founders. Like, I trust, like, her skill set is so high. I trust what she's going to do. Like, I trust the decision she's going to make is the best. And it probably was like we had to see each other work. We had to give each other space to grow. We had to learn each other's skill strengths. But I just I think now we like 100% have this trust no matter what. And I think that's what it kind of takes to be like, right, okay, whatever.
Definitely.
Was there a discussion or sort of even an awareness of the different kind of roles and responsibilities that you guys would have in terms of like one of you's more skilled in one area than the other? Because also you're working in the exact same environment, so presumably you have pretty similar skill sets, or maybe not. So maybe not at all.
Shaking her head.
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly not.
So
well, actually, it was like yes and no. So we did it together. It wasn't just no, because she was saying yes, I was saying no.
Right.
I think initially it wasn't very clear, although as the product became more developed and as we like worked together for longer, strengths became clear. And how we split it now is like City is in charge of product. She studied computer science at Columbia. She understands tech much better than I do, whereas I did philosophy and economics and I head up growth. So we come together for like strategic things, but then each person also like runs and executes like on their own. So that's kind of what we came to after, was it a year? Because in the first year, when it was just the two of us, you do everything.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the point in like splitting?
And you're like, oh, I'll also do that. I'll also do this. But yes, I think your skill sets and your strengths just make themselves aware. And if you are open to just listening and be like, yeah, cool, that actually makes sense. It was very natural. And there was a lot of overlap before. Now there's like none. But now I think what's really exciting is it's like we're so comfortable in how we work together. Great. Like right now, this is like a very funny month because there's like an initiative and it fully crosses over. Like Heinen's fully plugged into this one product initiative, which all the insights are coming from her. And I'm like, oh, this is the best thing ever because I just don't, it's just so much to do all of it. Fresh eyes. And I am plugged in the other sense, which actually could fall into growth and we're fully swapping. And it's so easy when you just have the trust and you're like, dude, you do it. It'll come back to me. I'll do it. It goes back to you.
You're probably more of an ops guy. You're probably more of like the actual like getting all the details sorted, and you seem maybe more customer facing, but I don't know because you're both quite presentable.
Very presentable.
Yeah.
Oh, I can actually see either of you playing that role.
That's what I mean. I can see either of you pitching.
Like,
but you seem maybe more of the numbers guy. Maybe I don't know.
Interesting. Man, we should switch things. So Jake does more ops finance stuff. That's actually true, and Ange like more sort of marketing. And to be fair, we both do sales, pitching,
and
like
also
the investment
all the
stuff. We
co-founder stuff.
We pretty much share that equally. HR. Like for a long time, we kind of didn't really have formally divided roles. We just kind of hired people into the roles we needed. And it's sort of naturally fallen in a certain way. But we have a joint to-do list. Like our to-do list is kind of split of what we both need to do, and a ridiculous number of tasks end up being like Jake and Dan.
Same day.
Maybe like we need to agree on something.
What was who was your go on.
I was just gonna say that, I mean, you picked up already on this, but like I think what does work quite well as a dynamic is that we do think quite differently, and that tends to have a sort of fairly
different but similar.
Yeah. Like there's a sort of yin yang element.
There's
to
definitely a mental model.
That's a really good way.
Actually.
That's how I think we are. We're different but similar.
Definitely.
I've just realised that.
Definitely. We come at things from very different perspectives,
but we have the same kind of idea of where we
goal.
want to go.
Yeah. We come at it from two different points of view.
But similar.
That's why I like to think it's true of all relationships, but people often use this specific terminology in romantic relationships, where people use the two things where it's like, oh, like you need things in common, but then also people use
opposites
attract.
Which isn't true.
It's not true. But I think the thing that you want is you want enough difference that you're bringing something, particularly a working relationship, this is clearer. You want enough difference that you're each bringing something different, but the big important stuff you need to be quite aligned on.
Yeah. You want to be going in the same direction, basically. And luckily we're united by our intense passion for storing bags.
They always say follow your passion wherever it is.
What do you think the experience has been like? I mean, I'm sure it's been positive, but in terms of working with a friend, because we're really big on it, and we've interviewed a bunch of co-founders that do work with friends or even family. We're massive supporters of it. I mean, I feel like the fact that I get to work with my best mate every day on something I enjoy is such a blessing.
I am going to tell you the opposite. However, I'm
going to bring it to you, Jake. Listen, TGF exclusive.
Right down the lens, right there.
I think Jake will appreciate this. We work really well together. Right, and actually we're friends, but we studied together and worked together, and we knew from the way that we studied that we worked together well. However, we did originally have a third person we started with.
Dun 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 dun. Dun.
Okay,
and he died. Oh, please don't say he died. That's
no matter how much I throttled. No. But no, my actual answer is, so like we said, the first year that we started it, we were thinking like, oh, this is a project to learn about startups, right? And so classic startup error, we didn't really have any sort of legal like literally we set up a business, we didn't have any vesting or anything, right?
We also didn't quite have the same long-term vision and approach, and I mean ultimately this was one of the things where things broke down.
And we also didn't think like, oh, what are the so we said, what are the, you asked what roles you fill, like I would say, particularly if you work well together, like you can have two non-tech people in a tech company, and even then actually there's a weakness that you don't have a tech person, but you can find that third person, right? You should try and find a third tech person. We were three non-tech people, and it was really just three uni mates who were like, oh, we want to start a business. And at that point, being fully, the guy was nice enough, but like, it was more one of those things where he was just kind of there, and like, it just feels silly when you're thinking of it as a project to be like, no, you can't do this project with us, right? And then very soon,
as things got more serious, I think was where it did start to...
It became clear we weren't aligned, couldn't work that well with him. So I would actually say, like, not everyone who you're friends with you can work with. The same way, people have had this experience with roommates, right? Where like you can have a great friend and then you live with them and it's like, I hate living with this person.
So true.
It's so true.
Yeah, I think I we've said this a million times. I feel like he's probably the only friend that I think I could. I've got one other friend I think I could work with, but he's probably.
Mate, you that back to there we go. You walked back that earlier opinion really quick.
I'm actually jumping shit. But yeah, no, it's.
I couldn't agree with that more.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Was there any resentment now? Do you think it was mutual at the end?
The third person.
Yeah, the third person.
Unfortunately, there's definitely resentment.
Yeah, no, it didn't end well. I mean, it basically, part of the problem is that because we didn't have a vesting schedule, it was at the point where like it was seeming like it wasn't working. Basically, this person became very defensive, and it was very hard to work out anything because basically they were like, well, you can't kick me out because I'll walk away with a third of the company, and we're like, well, you can't do that because then you're going to kill the company. I mean, he's a nice enough guy. We're young. There was,
How old were you at this kind of time?
This would have been like 24, probably.
No, younger than that. 23.
I think I was 24.
You must have been 20. I might have been 21, 22.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
We're 1 year apart.
No, you turned 30.
And you're turning 29.
I was 21 when we started the business.
Yeah.
I was 20 when we
2
started
years
the business. Okay, yeah, fine. So I was 20 to 22, 22, 23. Yep.
Yeah.
I
was 23.
I don't think it matters.
You said I was the numbers guy.
You're in your early 20s. Can you maybe touch on like actually how you went about dealing with the actual process of getting rid of that guy? Because I think a lot of people, I've known that in the past I've definitely struggled with conflict. I don't like conflict. I'd rather make everyone happy if I can. I'm better at it now when I was younger. But
honestly,
it's
practice. I think we'd say the same though. I mean, I don't know that we necessarily did it the best way at the time, and it's something we've both had to get more comfortable with. And actually, I think it's kind of a maturing process. Like now we're in our late 20s. You feel you've just had so many more difficult conversations. You've fired people. You've
had breakups.
Right? This actually did feel at the time. This felt like worse than a romantic breakup. This was really difficult because it sort of felt like it affected so many more people. You know, it was like we had all these staff that we were very conscious of, like, how were they?
It's not just you that impacts, basically.
Oh, so you had staff at that point.
We had early investors.
It took a long time.
This was like you're kicking the idea around in your living room.
No, this is the problem. The problem is
we probably could have dealt with it.
We should have dealt with it earlier.
This is the tricky thing.
If we had sorted out like a founders agreement, we would have dealt with it much earlier. Is the answer. But basically, because of that, we're like, it's so hard to extricate them legally. We need to try and make it work, and then it just kept being painful to work with them.
See, mine. Sorry.
No.
I was going to say my naivety would be that if you bring in investors on board, I would have thought investors would almost tell you to be putting that sort of stuff in place before they get on board.
So
that's actually, unless it was like family and friends.
No. That's exactly what happened.
Okay.
It was when we brought investors on board that we had to bring in that structure, which made it possible. Which is why we couldn't do it until we had staff and stuff.
How much of it do you think was because it was a third person? Do you think it's a case of like too many cooks, or like
no.
Do you think you could have run it with?
I think there are definitely.
I think the right combos you definitely can make it work. I think look at Airbnb and other examples. I think it's about complementary skill sets, and also I'd say it probably links to the roommate thing too. It's kind of a culture thing, and I think where things broke down for us was that and the great thing since has been Ant and I have been very aligned on culture, and like. You know, it's not that you necessarily have to agree all the time. In fact, it's often not a bad thing when you do disagree, but you have mature ways of resolving it, and you kind of like. You lean on who sort of feels more strongly about different things. But in that case, I remember at the time when the three of us, we had this horrible culture of blame. Like, you know, we'd try and decide things, and then someone would be like, "Oh, I disagree with that," and then you'd hold people like you'd be like, "Oh, that was your fault."
That was
and actually, when
it's easy to blame it on that person, but we also just weren't taking it seriously enough. It all would have been easier if we were thinking like serious as a business, and then things like, okay, well, we're not working well together. Fine. Like, the thing is, it doesn't need to be. The most interesting thing was like employees and investors didn't care as much as we thought, and you kind of realize that was business. Like, it is business. Like, of course, we're people and stuff, but you don't need to be so emotive sometimes. Sometimes, like even if it's like, oh, hey, this isn't a fit anymore. It's like, okay, great.
Can you talk us through the process of finding a co-founder and how you knew you were ready to find a co-founder?
Yeah, so this is jumping forward a little bit in time. So it was about 18 months. 18 months in, I decided that it would be good to get someone on. The process of the actual doing it, I put a post up on LinkedIn, and that was pretty much end of. I put a post up on Instagram and on LinkedIn, and just kind of wanted to see how far it went. I gave I guess you guys must know a little bit about LinkedIn marketing. I gave the post some attributes that I thought might make it more widely seen than others. It wasn't just hey, here's a job description, share with your network. I kind of made it a bit about the business journey and made it kind of quite engaging. So it ended up that about 50,000 people saw the post, and from that I had some really high quality applications.
Oh, interesting.
And one of those was my co-founder Lucy, who, as it happens, was working with a girl I knew from university at BBH advertising agency, and she kind of checked with our mutual friend Joy. She was like, is Will a decent guy? Like, what's the crack with his little startup thing? And then she came to interview, and she was absolutely fantastic.
And what role was she being brought on for?
So it was called a co-founder, and that's confusing for a lot of people. God, I'm aware that there's lots of confusing elements about my business. I really need to
This isn't a podcast. This is therapy.
I really need to sit down therapy. And rebrand the whole thing. But yeah, it is confusing because people are like, well, Lucy wasn't there at the beginning, so how could she possibly be a co-founder? But the title makes complete sense to me, and hopefully also to her, because her role is entirely as broad as mine. Like, her remit is absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And the idea,
standard startup kind of
standard startup type thing. And the idea was very much to bring on someone to increase our capacity and how much we could do, but give someone the same kind of breadth of experience that I've been having, because I was enjoying it. I was having a brilliant time, and as I was saying before about building the team, you kind of want to share that with someone. And I'm very lucky that I found Lucy, who's skill set is slightly different to my own, but we have a very similar attitude to lots of the important things. And my final recruitment stage was getting her to sell at our Sunday market stall, which I was talking about before, and watching her interact with people and the respect she has for other people is kind of so core to how I view the world. And when you are selling a product and promoting a product like this, a food and drink thing, you have to be totally respectful to everyone and non-judgmental. And watching Lucy flog ginger beer in Camden Passage on a Sunday, it was very obvious to me that she not only got the products really well, but wanted to treat people well and kindly and make sure that they were nourished and had very similar kind of alignment in values to me.